Hello everyone and welcome back to Carvenus 14. Now today we are going to be talking about Shenhe once again. Now if you guys saw my last video on Shenhe, which is stating reasons why you should pull for her, right? I also have some bad news for you guys because of course for every piece of good news, there's always a piece of bad news. And unfortunately, Shenhe is not one of those that just straight up doesn't have anything bad going for her. Now, today, I'm not going to be talking about her support game. Honestly, I genuinely can't find any fault within her support, right? Like, out of all of the support footage I've seen, honestly, I really can't think of too many problems for Shenhe's support. I would say she's definitely a very solid, high-tier, good support character to have for your Cryo DPS. So I have no problems with with support Shenhe. However, what I am going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about physical DPS Shenhe and Cryo DPS Shenhe. I actually want to make two separate videos on them. So I wanted to cover Cryo DPS Shenhe within this video and physical DPS Shenhe in another video that I'll probably make after this one. So yeah, I wanted to talk about those two types of build that you can actually do for Shenhe and talk about the drawbacks for them, because I've already gone through the actual advantages for them, right? With with both of the DPSs in that video on why you should pull for Shenhe, which is literally the most recent video I've actually made, so the one before this one. And I stated the good things about them now. Today's video is going to be about Cryo DPS Shenhe and why I think that Cryo DPS Shenhe, albeit she is ridiculously powerful, all of that power does come at a cost, and I'm going to show you guys why. Now obviously I do have to say one thing before we get on to the video, guys. I haven't built Cryo DPS Shenhe. Of course, that may mean that my word about Cryo DPS Shenhe isn't as worth as someone that does go with Cryo DPS Shenhe. In fact, there are a few Cryo DPS Shenhe mains out there on YouTube as well, actually. So you can definitely go and watch those videos and see for yourself if you prefer to go with Cryo DPS Shenhe. But like I said, I have no experience with playing with Cryo DPS Shenhe. Maybe once or twice, but to be brutally honest, that was a while ago when Shenhe first came out, to the point where it kind of just doesn't really matter. So yeah, I do have a small tiny amount of experience with her, but obviously my word compared to a lot of Cryo DPS Shenhe mains out there is just not worth that much. So of course I am going to state my own opinions, but it's down to you guys if you really want to take my word for it, or if you want to compare my point of view with other people's Cryo DPS Shenhe point of views and showcases and stuff like that. So I'm going to try and keep this as non-biased as possible, as viewer-friendly as possible. Try not to get too complicated or anything. So there won't be a lot of maths in this video. But yeah, so we'll get on with it. Now, of course, Cryo DPS Shenhe. The main reason Cryo DPS Shenhe is so strong is because of the fact that Shenhe's passive, not her passive, sorry, but her elemental skill, she can actually boost her own damage if she infuses her damage with Cryo, right? In fact, this is why everyone plays Cryo DPS Shenhe, because she can literally boost any form of cryo damage. This doesn't actually have to be the person's own cryo damage. It could be through an infusion. And yeah, that's a pretty big clue as to where this build is going and how you play Cryo DPS Shenhe. Now, the way you, the way you actually play Cryo DPS Shenhe is effectively you need a party setup. So this is the party setup that you would normally go for. So yeah, so we have Shenhe here.
I will do as you command.
We have Shenhe here as the actual DPS. Now, obviously, Shenhe can't actually infuse all of her attacks in Cryo. She can only do physical damage outside of her elemental skill and burst. And that's where her nephew comes in. Where is he? I do have him, promise.
Time for some training?
Yeah, so if you guys didn't know, Shenhe's nephew, Chongyun, does actually infuse any form of normal attack, charge attack damage from melee champions. Their attacks are infused in Cryo. Now, what does melee characters mean? Effectively, melee characters are sword users, claymore users, and polearm users. Because the reason they're called melee users is because they're very close up. Ranged users are catalysts as well as bow users, so they can't get infused. But melee characters like polearm users and sword users and claymore users, Shenhe being a polearm user, her attacks can get infused with Cryo. So this is why and where the original idea for Cryo DPS Shenhe came from. The fact that these two are very, very good together. Now, of course, there is the thing, right? Here. So you can now see that all of my Shenhe's attacks are Cryo. You can see her weapon is infused, right? And then when you step out of the circle, you do still have some of the infusion a little bit, but of course it does go away after a while. Now, this is why a lot of people with Cryo DPS Shenhe use Chongyun, right? Chongyun's elemental skill has a 15-second cooldown. However, if you're like me, you will have the sacrificial greatsword if you were lucky enough. If you have the sacrificial greatsword, there's already half of your problems basically just you know, solved already, because the sacrificial greatsword has a passive where after you use an elemental skill, there's a chance where you can actually reset your elemental skill cooldown. So effectively, if you're fighting and Chongyun's field runs out, you can just pop your elemental skill down again. And the field, as you can see, doesn't last forever. It goes away after 10 seconds. So there's a 5-second downtime where your Shenhe will not be dealing any damage unless you have the sacrificial greatsword in order to reset the actual skill. So there's that. And even still, that's kind of just delaying the inevitable, because the sacrificial greatsword and all the sacrificial weapons can only reset your elemental skill once, and it's on a cooldown for like a few seconds. It depends on the refinement rank, but I believe at refinement rank at refinement rank 2, it's like 26 seconds. So at refinement rank 1, it's around 30 seconds. So half a minute you have to wait in order for the passive to come back up. Now, obviously, for Chongyun, that's not a big deal because his elemental skill lasts for 15 seconds. So altogether, if you calculate, I said no maths in this video, but basically, guys, what will happen is there's technically this passive on Chongyun is actually quite good because he has his field up for 90% of the time, and the downtime you'll have is only 5 seconds for the full 30-second duration. So it's not too bad with Chongyun. So this weapon is actually has very good synergy with Chongyun. So yeah.
I take my meal.
And then, of course, there's the fact that Chongyun does actually buff your attack speed as well. In fact, one of his talents, I believe, is, anyone within the field that's a melee user, right, their normal attack speed is increased by 8%. So that means your Shenhe's DPS overall is going to be increased because your damage per second will be increased because you can attack faster, right? So, Then, of course, this passive is kind of just, it basically buffs Chongyun's own damage and stuff like that. Well, it doesn't buff him, it just allows him to do more damage with his elemental, what's it called? Elemental skill. So yeah, now Chongyun's elemental skill by itself doesn't actually give you anything unless you have the passive unlocked. Now, of course, his C1 doesn't do much for support. His C2 is a very nice utility thing. So basically what it does is it decreases your character's elemental skill and burst cooldown by 15%. Effectively. So that's really good, especially if you're going for the weird build that I've got on Shenhe, right, with the artifact set. You could effectively get the cooldown lower, right? So you can actually have this buff up a lot more of the time if you are going for Cryo DPS Shenhe with this artifact set. Yeah, this is actually a very nice constellation to have. And then, of course, C3 is what it does, like it buffs his elemental burst. His C4 basically is whenever a champion, like, what is it? Chongyun regenerates 1 energy every time he hits. Oh, every time he hits. So again, this is not going to be really too useful. And then his C6 kind of just, what is it? Your elemental burst, I believe. Ah, okay. So it just, you know, it allows Chongyun to do more damage. So yeah, realistically, Chongyun's only buff that he can actually give to Shenhe is probably this passive right here. That's really the only damaging increase buff that you can get. And then there's the utility buff that he gets from his Constellation too. So he only realistically has 2 ways to kind of help Shenhe and buff her, right? So yeah, now I'm not saying that's a big issue. It definitely isn't. He's already doing so much by infusing Shenhe's attacks with cryo,
The assumption
right?
that every
So
person has
yeah,
somewhere to
there's
call
that.
home is
But
naive.
this is where the problem begins,
I got used to
guys.
living in the
As
mountains
Cryo
alongside
DPS
the birds and
Shenhe,
beasts a long time ago.
you kind of have to run Chongyun on your team. So effectively, what that means is, without Chongyun, your damage is going to go down. And you might be saying, oh, your damage is basically going to be non-existent. And you might be saying, well, yeah, that makes sense, but why is that a big deal? Because it means you don't have you don't have 3 slots available to pick and swap characters anymore. So you only have 2 available slots. And if another character comes out that's really,
That
really
pole arm
strong,
doesn't distinguish
right?
friend from
And you
foe.
want to use them on your
And there's
team, but you
clearly a
used up
limit
all
to
your
the
slots. You can't
Red
exactly
Wolf's
get rid of Chongyun, can you? Because you
That's why
kind
I
of
loathe
need him.
crowded areas.
So all I'm saying, guys, is there's a little bit less flexibility with your team compositions, and unfortunately, if you want the best possible damage on Cryo DPS Shenhe, which is what everyone is running this set on Shenhe, right? Everyone is running this set on Shenhe. You're going to need
Chivalry
a
will
Hydro
never
character.
die.
Now, why is that another problem? Because if you guys didn't know, Shenhe, being a Cryo character, has access to this absolutely broken set. The Blizzard Strayer set, right? Now, the Blizzard Strayer set, it gives you a cryo damage bonus of 15%, which is nice. But then the 4-piece is beyond broken. Whenever your character, so whenever Shenhe hits an opponent affected by cryo, her crit rate towards them is going to be increased by 20%. And if Shenhe hits an opponent that is frozen basically, then her crit rate is increased by 40% towards that opponent. Yeah. So if you're going to be running this set, you can effectively, which to be fair is what every single Shenhe main, right, Cryo DPS Shenhe main runs this set on Shenhe, because it's literally just free crit rate. And if you guys didn't watch my last video, I already stated that in that video, with this set equipped and everything else included, so this set plus the base crit rate that you get plus the cryo resonance that you get, all together from this set alone, as well as all the other base values, without building any crit rate, you can get 60% crit rate towards frozen opponents. Yeah. 60% crit rate towards frozen opponents. That's without taking into account any substats or any main stats. So effectively, with this set, you don't even need to care about your crit rate, because you already have enough crit rate, and that's brilliant. It really is. Of course, you only get all this crit rate against opponents that are affected by, that are frozen effectively. Against opponents that are only affected by cryo, it's 40% crit rate, which is still a respectable amount, but it's not the 60% crit rate that you want to be getting. So most Shenhe DPS comps will be running Jing Chui as well, at least if you're running the Blizzard Strayer set. Of course, you can run something like you can run 2-piece Blizzard Strayer and 2-piece Shimanow's Reminiscence, or 2-piece Gladiators with 2-piece Blizzard Strayer. But the main thing is if you're running 2-piece Blizzard Strayer and 2-piece what's it called? An attack percent 2-piece set, right? Then you're missing out on DPS when you could just go for full 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, right? And you would want to be running a full 4-piece Blizzard Strayer because of how really broken the set actually is. It's just free crit rate. And even if you do run a 2-piece, right, like two 2-pieces, so you're running 2-piece Blizzard Strayer, 2-piece Shimanowers, you guys might be thinking, well, that just means that, you know, I have more flexibility with the actual stat pieces and stuff, right? So if because two 2-pieces are much easier to build because of the fact that you can actually swap your sets around depending on which set gives you better stats and substats and stuff like that. Well, you see, the thing is with the 2-pieces, right, you're going to need crit rate. You will need to focus on crit rate, right? And obviously, if you guys actually have been playing this game for a long time, and even a short time, you know how annoying those crit rate and crit damage substats are. Getting rid of relying on getting crit rate is a massive bonus, because you no longer have to care about the amount of crit rate. So honestly, it's, in my opinion, it's much more worth to go for the 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, right? And not care about crit rate, rather than going for a 2 pieces, which is theoretically easier to build, but having to take into account good ratios. Of course, if you guys are about the min-maxing, this is an important point. But even if you aren't about min-maxing, getting a very nice crit ratio is obviously going to make your open world experience more fun, right? So, yeah, you want at least 50% crit rate, and if you guys are confident you can get that with the 2 pieces, then this point doesn't really apply to you that much. But what I'm trying to say is, if you're running Cryo DPS Shenhe, it would be a massive waste if you guys don't go for anything but Blizzard Strayer 4-piece, because of how broken the set is. Honestly, it's in my opinion, much more worth to go for the full 4-piece and not care about crit rate at all, rather than going for 2 pieces and having to care about a crit substat, when you could just only care about one of them and not the other. That sounds so ridiculously overpowered in my opinion. So yeah, that's effectively what I'm trying to say. So another thing about that is, obviously you need the opponent to be affected by by Frozen in order to get the full 60% crit rate. So that means you're going to need a Hydro character. Now luckily Jingtree does exist, and because Hoyoverse kind of didn't really have a lot of like a huge idea on how to make Genshin Impact, they kind of gave all the characters that came out at the beginning of the game very broken kits, and luckily Jingtree is one of those characters that is blessed to have a very strong kit. For starters, he has the elemental skill, which is on a 20-second long cooldown, but if you have Sacrificial Sword, then you can actually get a reset on it, which is very nice. And the Rain Swords, of course, they apply Hydro to opponents, number 1. And number 2, they actually act as a mini shield. What they effectively do, guys, is they tank a portion of the damage that you actually receive. So a little bit like how Dea's elemental skill works, right? So Jingtree's Rain Swords tank a little bit of the damage that you actually receive, and on top of that, when they break, they actually heal you as well. So he's like basically like a pseudo shielder / healer. So he's effectively a 2-in-1. He's not brilliant at both of them, but he's a bit more of a supplement rather than the actual role, effectively. So if you don't have a healer or a shielder on this on your Shenhe team, right, Jingtree is a very good kind of clutch character, because of the fact that he can tank damage as well as heal you when his Rain Swords explode. And his constellations obviously just make him better, right? So where is his constellations? Yeah, so his first constellation gives him 1 Rain Sword, which just means extra tankiness and extra healing. His second one basically decreases the opponent's Hydro resistance, right? When his Rain Cutter skill, so his elemental burst, right, is up. It decreases our Hydro resistance, and it also increases the duration of this elemental burst by 3 seconds. So by default, the skill lasts for around 15 seconds. Now it lasts for around 18 seconds, which is a very nice buff. So yeah, his C3 increases his elemental burst damage, which is really good, and his C4 is effectively, what's it called? Throughout the duration of his elemental burst, the damage dealt by his elemental skill is increased by 50%. So again, even more personal damage. His C5 increases his elemental skill, and his C6 is one of the best constellations for him, because it basically gives him another Rain Sword. Now, if you didn't know, Jingtree's Rain Swords in his elemental burst go in the 2-3-2-3 pattern. So there's 2 Rain Swords initially that strike down, and then there's 3 that strike down. Now it's 2-3-5. Which means even more damage, even more Hydra application. That's even better for Shenhe's team, because of the fact that, you know, she can apply Frozen really well, and of course with Jingtree's field down, I mean with Chongyun's field down, you're going to be able to get right up close and personal and affect opponents with Cryo, right? So a lot of free damage right then and there, right? And of course, this is where I go back to my previous point. Now, if you're running Blizzard Strayer, you have to have Chongyun on your team to infuse the Cryo, and you need a Hydro character on your team as well. And there's 2 problems with that. Number one, it means you only have one slot, one free available slot to actually house a champion, house a character. So that means you can only have one character as like a flex role. So it could be a shielder, it could be a healer, it could be another damage buffer, someone like that, right? Or it could be a reaction elemental mastery buffer, basically, like Sucrose or Kazuha, right? And of course, the second problem is that there's only, as of right now, as of making this video, there is only 3 Hydro users that are actually free-to-play accessible. Well, I say free-to-play accessible. Technically, only 2 of them are free-to-play accessible. Yeah, and that is Xingqi and Barbara and Candice. Now, let me see. Where's Hydro? There it is. Okay, confirm filter. So, yeah, I do have Ayato for whatever reason, but, you know, it is what it is. We shall... Hold on. I got a better idea to show this character archive. We'll go to the character archive, and then I will set it to Hydro. Confirm. Now, as you can see, there's loads of Hydro characters in the game, but the problem is only 3 of them are 4 stars. Candice, Xingqi, and Barbara. And as you can see from my Hydro character roster, I don't actually have a lot of them. Of course, I did actually skip on most of the banners, right? But the main thing is I didn't even want Ayato in the first place, to be honest. I was just going for Rosario Constellations at the time, but that didn't work out. So a bit of a waste of Primogems, but hey, it is what it is. Yeah, so Xingqi is one of the most broken 4 stars in the game, so that's good. Barbara is also a really good 4 star, but the problem is Barbara's not amazing like Xingqi because she has one major flaw, and she constantly makes your character wet, which means you can obviously get frozen yourself if you're facing cryo opponents. And that's not really something that people would want to face. So, yeah, of course, there is a chance that you guys might actually have someone like Mona, because Mona's a standard 5-star character. So if you have Mona, that's pretty good, right? Because Mona also decreases opponents' defense by like a certain percentage because of her ultimate. So yeah, however, it is only for 4 seconds. So it is only for 4 seconds, so it's not a lot. However, if you are really quick, you can get a full, like a really, nearly a full rotation of Shenhe's damage, right? So it could be a very nice burst of damage, to be brutally honest. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the Hydro, to be fair, the only Hydro characters that were actually out in the game when you first got the game, obviously, if you were like an original player like me, all the way back in 2020 when the game first came out, you really only had Xingqi and Barbara, and then, you know, Tartaglia came along. Now, none of that really matters now because there's loads of characters out here, and Yelan is one of the most broken characters in the game right now because she's so similar to Xingqi. She's basically Xingqi, but she has much better scaling than Xingqi because she's a 5-star. So that just makes her even better because of the fact that, you know, she's based off of a character like Xingqi. So, yeah. Now, of course, like I said, if you are a free-to-play character, or a person, I should say, if you are a free-to-play player, right, then most likely you won't actually have a lot of the 5 stars in the game, which means you won't have Nilo, or Yelan, or Ayato, or Kokomi, or Tartaglia, or Mona. You most likely will only have either Candice, Xingqi, and Barbara. Right, and Barbara you obviously won't use because Barbara's utility kind of falls off towards the late game. When you get to late game, to be fair, when you get to mid game, you kind of just replace her with another healer like Bennett or something because her use is kind of just outclassed effectively. She just gets outclassed by a load of healers later on in the game. But in terms of Hydro characters, she's easily just outclassed by Xingqi because the fact that Xingqi can tank damage and heal a little bit, and his Hydro application is better as well. So, yeah. Now, as for Candice, Candice is a pretty good option to go with on this team as well because she has like a parry/counter mechanic, whatever you want to call it. And of course, her elemental burst basically increases all characters all characters damage, like elemental damage, by 20%. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure I do believe this is correct, but I'm pretty sure Chongyun's cryo infusion cannot actually get overridden. Yeah, unless unless it's obviously by characters like Zhao or Chino, and I'm pretty sure Bennett's elemental burst as C6 also overrides it, but I don't think Hydro infusions overpower Cryo infusions. So in that regard, Candice can actually work pretty well with this team composition, right? But of course, what I'm trying to say is Candice is only available through the gacha, so unless you actually, you know, put Primo Gems in the actual banner when she first came out, there was no other way for you to really obtain her. Whereas with the other characters, right, with Barbara, if you were playing at the very beginning of the game, you got 3 copies of Barbara for basically free, just for playing the game. And then for Jing Chui, well, he was free effectively during the Lantern Rite Festival for the last 2 times. So if you did pick Jing Chui, then you would have had him. So there was a way to get him for free as well. But of course, Candice hasn't had that option. So if you are purely free to play, don't put any Primo Gems in the banner or anything. The only 4 stars that you would realistically have is Jing Chui and Barbara. But of course, if you do have other characters, other Hydro characters, then, well, you're in luck. Of course, one good thing about this party composition, though, is the fact that Jing Chui's role can actually be replaced by any Hydro character. Because in order for the third slot to be useful, you just need a Hydro character. Anyone that can apply a good amount of Hydro, you're good. But of course, that does mean that the third slot is only and strictly, you know, for a Hydro character. And then of course there's the last slot. Now as for the last character slot, this is more of your flex slot, right? This is more of your flex slot. Now you can literally put anyone here. You can put Zhongli here for more shielding if you need. You can put, where is he? Where's the man? There he is. You can put Bennett here. You can put Bennett here if you really wanted to. You can put Raiden Shogun here for, you know, for energy recharge. You can put Yoon Jin here for normal attacking buffs. You can put another Hydro character there if you really wanted to get like a double Hydro, double Cryo resonance going on. Yeah, you can put an Electro character there, although I don't know why you'd want to. You probably wouldn't put an Electro character in this comp because it just doesn't really make any sense. But yeah, all I'm saying is you guys could probably put Sucrose here as well. Sucrose or Sayu, basically anyone that can boost your elemental mastery and stuff like that. So realistically, your last slot is your only flex slot. You can basically put anyone here and it doesn't really matter. All you guys need in order to actually make Shenhe function are these 3. And obviously, there's a massive problem with that. Number 1, you cannot replace Chong Yun. So you'll always have only 2 slots available. And then, of course, Jing Chui can be replaced, but only by another Hydro character. So then again, your options are limited. So yeah, that's always another problem. And let's not forget, guys, I know how big Chong Yun's elemental skill is, right? It is a fairly big amount. I mean, it's all this space. Well, actually, no, not down there, but it's like all this space right around here, effectively. Right? So it's a fairly big space. You could effectively go from, like, you could effectively just, like, do a dash and another dash, and you're still inside the actual radius, right, in order to deal damage. But of course, with the way that the game is actually progressing, there's a lot of champions that have some form of mobility, right? And other forms of higher resistances. So obviously, with the Sumeru patch, there are a lot of enemies that actually can teleport. Like the Fatui Mirror Maiden. Even she didn't come out during the Sumeru update. But the Fatui Mirror Maiden, the Cryo Sissin Mage, the regular Sissin Mage, they all have some form of teleport. And then, of course, there's the Fatui Hunter. And then with the actual Sumeru enemies, the fungi they move around quite a bit. So you can and because they're small, you can easily just knock them out. I completely forgot about that. Smaller opponents, you can easily just knock them out of the circle. But if you don't need to knock them out, you could easily just do a 5-hit string and then run away, and then, you know, and then cancel it again and keep going like that. But of course, the last hit is where Shenhe's getting most of her damage from, because that has the massive multiplier on her damage, right? And the best part is, like, look at her normal skill, guys, right? We go down, it has 129.7% scaling, so it's not ludicrously high, right? However, Shenhe is very, very blessed to have a good... Well, I'll actually show you here. So what you can do is, effectively, you can do a... Well, effectively, guys, what you can do is a 5-hit normal string. You can do an 5-hit normal string, and
Manifest!
catch someone like that. Of course, against a bigger enemy, it's not really amazing. Against a smaller enemy, though, you could do something like... unless they die too quickly. But what I'm trying to say, guys, is effectively, you could do a 5-hit normal string, right? A regular string, and then if they fly away, you can dash towards them and catch them there. So, Shenhe's got very good juggle potential. So you can do one, like, you could do something like this, and then dash, and then keep the combo going, and then dash again if you have C1, and if you don't have dash, you can finish it off with a charge attack. So Shenhe is one of those characters that just have very, very good juggle potential, right? So even if you do get the last hit off, Shenhe, because of how good her scaling is and how fast she is when she dashes, you can obviously just dash. And of course, an issue with that is obviously if you do dash, you are wasting Shenhe's talent buff, right? Like, number one, you're going to be wasting her elemental skill buff because it won't be buffing her normal and charge attacks, and then you'll also be wasting this passive. So I don't really see why people would dash. But the main thing is even if you don't want to use her elemental skill, you can still do a charge attack and catch people that way, right? And carry on the combo. Trust me, it's very easy. I do it all the time, right? So effectively, what I'm trying to say is Shenhe is a very fun character to play. Her playstyle is very fun, but of course, against smaller champions, right, when she knocks them away, right, you can't really knock them away like smaller champions out of the actual circle, because, you know, if you knock them out of the circle, your damage buff is going to go away. And of course, on top of all of that, even if you are playing against, like, heavier opponents, right, some heavier opponents, like bosses or the opponents I've literally just stated, as well as the Sumeru ones, like the mercenary, like the the Eremite, the Floral Ring Dancer, the new Crimson Scorpion Woman, Babel, basically. If you guys have played the mission, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, those types of champions, right? They have some form of teleport, so keeping them inside the circle is going to be pretty difficult. And of course, you do have, Chongyun, you can, not Chongyun, Jingqi, you can easily just freeze them. But bigger opponents are much more difficult to freeze, right? And you can't even CC bosses. You can't even CC world bosses or anything like that. So, if they jump out of the actual circle, then you can't even freeze them. So, like I said, it's a bit difficult in order to actually keep the actual frozen thing going against, higher level opponents. Of course, if you have Jingqi, then you're very fortunate because you can actually combo freeze people very, very easily. So it's hardly going to be a problem if you have Jingqi. But what I'm trying to say, guys, is that against bigger opponents, it's much more difficult to freeze them freeze them in other ways. It frees them in regular ways. They'll take a bit more of an effort in order to actually freeze, like the lore shells and stuff like that, right? So, yeah, I think that's effectively all there is in the actual video. So, of course, Chongyun able to infuse, but of course, you don't want to get too trigger happy and keep pressing Shenhe's normal attack and accidentally box them outside of the actual circle. Even though the space is massive, you could still run out of the circle. And then, of course, there's Jingqi, who is really strong, really brilliant, of course, and yeah, there's no problems with him, but like I said, if you want the most amount of damage and the most amount of flexibility with Shenhe, you do want to go with these three in your team, right? And these two are free-to-play friendly, but of course, Jingqi, you can swap him out for any Hydro character and they'll still get the job done. But Chongyun, you need to keep in the team. Unless there's another character like Chongyun that comes out, where he can actually give you Cryo Infusion, right? Or he or she can give you Cryo Infusion, right? You don't really want to replace Chongyun. So yeah, Chongyun will have to stay. Jingqi can be swapped out for another Hydro character, but they are limited to Hydro only, right? You can't choose anyone outside of Hydro, and then you have one more flex slot. Whereas with the physical DPS Shenhe team, the only restriction you really have is Electro in order to make your damage there. You don't even need... Zhongli and Yunjin are there, right? But you don't even need them. You can go down the double pyro route, or you could even go down a full rainbow comp if you really wanted to, right? And this Lisa can be swapped out for another Electro unit. So you have more freedom with physical DPS Shenhe. But with Cryo DPS Shenhe, your choices are a little bit more limited. However, for that limited... for those limited choices, you do get a lot of power. And don't get me wrong, guys. Cryo DPS Shenhe is very, very strong, right? I'm not saying that she's weak at all. In fact, she's really strong. Stupidly strong. Because Shenhe's main role is buffing people's cryo damage. And, well, if she can do that amazingly, she can obviously buff herself amazingly as well, right? So, yeah, Cryo DPS Shenhe is stupidly strong. But all of this power will come at a cost. And that power is ridiculous damage. And the cost is flexibility. You don't have a lot of freedom when it comes to building team comps with Cryo DPS Shenhe. And in terms of the actual space you can fight in, you are limited there as well, right? You don't want to end up knocking people out of the circle, and if they do jump out of the circle, repositioning may be a little bit more difficult if you don't have the sacrificial greatsword on Chongyun, right? So repositioning may be a problem for you guys. Knocking them out of the circle, knocking opponents out of the circle may be a problem as well. And there's, of course, the fact that the team comp is a lot more restricted and not as free, as flexible as other, like, physical DPS Shenhe or support Shenhe. So, yeah, I am going to end the video off there, guys. I have been the moon. Wow. And the pyramid. Wow. And Shenhe. Wow. Okay, I have been Carvenus 14, and Sunrise with the moon. I do like this. This does put a smile on my face. Anyway, I have been Carvenus 14. Oh, tree! Never mind. I have been Carvenus 14, and still am. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I will see you all very, very soon. Goodbye.